I'm super excited because whilst the title of my current role is around equality and looking for ways in which the world can address the inequities and inequalities that cause ongoing disadvantage, I'm moving that, attention to a broader topic and domain, which is around our planet and our overall survival. So I've actually called this topic Green Swan, design or designers. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a talk about this, and hopefully it will give you something to think about. So why is it time for green swans? What is a green swan? What is it going to take? So I've been captivated and driven for some time by the larger issues facing us as a humanity: climate, gender equality, and increasingly planetary survival. My bias in tackling these issues has been one of design, just like all of us, co-creating preferred futures with people. And I have generally asked the question, what are we actually designing? Are we paying attention to the right problems? And are we making what the world needs? In this quest, I read pretty much every day on any platform in any means. I read. One recent book that I've read called Green Swans, The Coming Boom in Generative Capitalism by John Elkington, has really got me thinking. And not just thinking in a trivial way, but quite deep and profound. And it's been playing in my mind, hence the genesis of this talk. Elkington referred to some as a father of sustainability. And he's really been leading this discourse, and in particular is getting us to reckon with a concept, the green swan. So what is a green swan? Well, let me tell you what it's not. It's not a black swan. So you would have heard of the black swan, coined by the former options trader Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And a black swan, as he described it, is a rare event characterized by extreme impact and is retrospective, though not prospective in terms of its predictability. It's generally creates negative, unwelcome, and systemic impacts. You could argue that our pandemic has been a black swan. On the other hand, a green swan is an event or occurrence that takes the world by surprise. It's exponential in character because it produces outcomes previously considered to be not just improbable, but impossible. Green swans spur regeneration. They often evolve in response to black swans. They tend to benefit many. They change paradigms, values, mindsets, politics, governments, technologies, and business models. But where do we find these green swans playing? I've been thinking about this a bit, and I think the green swans are playing at the intersection of three areas: social demands and needs, organisations that are committed to sustainability and or facing unsustainable ways of operating, and capital markets pushing sustainability as an accountability. At this intersection, there are pushes and pulls for real action and change. So, for example, consumers are increasingly wanting to know, that's people like you and me, where are our products made? Where do they go after we've used them? So this concept of cradle to grave, that in itself not a new concept, is increasingly becoming something that we're asking of ourselves and what we do. And so if the solution we choose in whichever way of life is convenient and it's good for the environment, that's where we're going to go. The other drive around organisations is that pretty much every top listed company, you will find some form of chief for sustainability or vice president or global role. So it's no longer at the margins, but these leaders don't own profit and loss centres usually. They have whole business models that they need to influence, and in some cases change the very core of what their organisations do, not just for its current business, but for its future. And the capital markets, which I'm finding increasingly interesting, are driving very strong investment narratives to demanding companies to be accountable and committed to being sustainable. So when I think about all those factors about where those green swans might be playing, I actually think this is probably one of the most exciting times to be a designer. And if you've actually got design runs on the board and been working in this territory, you're already ahead of the game where people are desperate to get into. And so I actually believe that green swans can be found based on the fundamentals that we take as designers. And I think there are three basic things that we do. We actually seek to understand the basic and aspirational needs of all people, and we aim to get those met. The second point is that we seek to create solutions that are the better for more, and not just in one generation, but for multiple generations, and ultimately should improve the quality of life, not just for people, but for our planet. And that also, as good designers, we actually are constantly thinking about the future. And in many ways, we're trying to mitigate those future risks through being system-wide in our thinking and our designs. But I do think it means that as designers, we actually have to ask some pretty fundamental questions. So we can have this wonderful discussion about green swans, but what does it actually really mean for us in terms of designers? So I think there are three things that we've got to actually do. One is a new literacy. The second, we have to play a much longer game, and we have to have much more sophisticated and creative solutions. And potentially something that we actually haven't done typically is really taking a willingness to make a stand on an issue or a matter. So let me start with a new literacy for designers. A new literacy means we need to conceptualize new language that connects the unconnected and the diversity of the people that we need to work with. I believe that the language, which I touched on before, of capital markets, something we don't typically talk about here at ThinkPlace, is actually pretty critical. So the language around ESG, sustainability, environmental, social, governance factors, those things are actually been around for some time, but they're moving and evolving. And we need to actually understand those concepts, and we need to be literate and conversing in these areas. So I ask ourselves as designers, these are the things that are going around the newsletters, the back articles of the newspapers and so forth. There are investment houses that are now demanding companies to disclose plans about how their business's model will be compatible with a net zero economy. What type of designers are going to help businesses do that? How can we be the designers that do that? All companies are also being asked to think about their talent strategies. So a topic extremely dear to my heart about diversity, equity, inclusion, those things are now becoming much more about you need to demonstrate organizations that you're actually doing that. And that actually to be a sustainable organization, you need to have long-term plans to improve your diversity, equity, and inclusion, and think about that on a global scale. What are we doing as designers to really drive and move the needle in that area? In the language of private sector organizations, again, a space we don't typically work a lot as ThinkPlace designers. And so I ask you, if you were to sit opposite a chief sustainability officer, what questions would you ask them? What sort of conversation would you have? Do we actually understand what they're trying to achieve? There's a whole lot of language and challenges that we are yet to fully appreciate. So for example, as designers, and we are sitting opposite a chief sustainability officer, how might we actually help them in areas such as driving a system-wide argument that actually also results in black and white numbers that influence the accountable people within their businesses and their boards? How can we instigate new models for business so that they can reimagine their entire supply chain that can do good, and not just about the things that they can benefit, but for communities? And how might we help them create those pre-competitive collaborations that systematically and systemically shift whole sectors' behaviours? If the entire sector that uses plastics for their bottles that produces a product, that entire sector stopped using plastic for some other means, imagine the change it could make. But the new literacy is actually going to mean for us as designers that we actually have to start to pair up with those economists who are signed up to the sustainability agenda, the accountants who know how to define and count different types of units, and that actually as designers ourselves, what potential specific market intellect and knowledge do we need so we can actually navigate and influence? My third point, or my second point rather, around where we need to play. So the literacy is the first. This second one is about the long game and the sophisticated creative solutions. The reality is that for us as designers, we actually need to choose where we spend our creative capital. And our creative capital needs to play in the long game. What that long game actually means is that we're actually willing to spend decades seeing a change occur. And so that means actually making commitments to sectors, to different types of organizations, and really working through where there are fundamental model crises of how sectors work, and helping them reimagine and design new models that are not just sustainable, but they're regenerative, and they're actually resilient to future change, and in many ways be part of the partnership of creating the green swans that are much needed. It also means playing to our strengths, which is that we can convene people of different backgrounds, intents and goals, but we need to be much more sophisticated about that long game, which is taking the transformative design process. But then don't just go to that point, go beyond that point, creating just transitions, and then really measuring the changes that are occurring. I believe that the moment of truth for us designers will be the ability to create remarkable solutions that are creative, and defensively built on data and credible argument. So we have to think about our solutions as designers in ways that are integrated beautiful narratives of numbers, words, images, live storytelling. The storytelling doesn't stop. Do we turn into media companies? What are we? Who are we? So our role as designers in the long game and sophisticated creative solutions are going to ask of us way, way more than what we've ever done. My third and final point about our role as designers in this territory of green swans is standing your ground. And it's starting to emerge a little bit. I'm hearing the narratives around the floors. We are helping government write policy on sustainable land care. Are we actually helping them in all the ways that are possible? Are we actually limited by the current views and visions or limited visions of different stakeholders? At what point as designers are we prepared to say, we can't put our name to that unless it's actually stepping much more into that territory of making change and the real impact that we expect to see? I think that's actually going to be one of our biggest challenges as designers, is thinking very differently, that if we're part of the narrative of green swans, we've really got to embrace that idea that we stand for something, we push back at things, but also we're willing to learn new language, and that we're willing to bring different people to the table and create green swans that are here to stay.